My in-laws were drunk. Despite the whispers from people around us, my in-laws didn't seem to care as they kept yelling at me. Well, I guess it's too late since you're already married, but if you want to be part of this family, you need to show us you have enough money, they said. Yes, your dad is right, so make sure to give us $1,000 a month as a new bonus, they added. I was stunned by their words. I couldn't believe they would say such things at a wedding reception. I just stared at them, my face going pale. My dad took the microphone from them. Enough is enough. Don't you realize you're making fools of yourselves? He said. My name is Linda. I'm a 30-year-old office worker. I'm currently dating Larry, who is 32, 2 years older than me. I met him through a friend who was worried about me being single, so she introduced me to Larry. After dating for a year, Larry proposed, and now we are soon to be married. I lost my mother when I was very young, and my father raised me by himself. He worked very hard to take care of all my needs. I didn't have many worries growing up, but losing my mom, who I loved so much, deeply hurt me. Because I lost someone I cared about so much, I was cautious with my emotions. That's why I hadn't really dated anyone since my school days. I even thought it would be okay if I stayed single forever. Then I met Larry. At first, I didn't feel any romantic feelings for him, even though he asked me out many times. Larry really cared about me and was always a gentleman. Slowly, I began to open my heart to him, and we started dating. He kept caring for me, and I felt very happy. He became very special to me, and I started thinking I wanted to be with him forever. Then he proposed, and we decided to get married. Larry understood everything about me and was always kind to me no matter what. Don't worry, if you're ever feeling unsure about something, I'll be here for you until you feel better. I love you, Linda. You can count on me, he would say. His words moved me. He promised to make me happy for the rest of my life. Just being with him warmed my heart. If he cared that much for me, I thought I should do the same for him. When I told my father that we decided to get married, he was so happy that he cried. Wow, Linda, you're finally getting married. I'm so happy for you, he said. Oh, Dad, you're being dramatic, I joked. Wow, I hadn't heard anything like that from you until now. I was always worried that you might never get married, he replied. Oh, really? I had no idea you were worried about that, I said. Well, every father worries about his daughter, you know. Anyway, congratulations, he said. Thanks, Dad, I replied. I was so happy to be congratulated by my dad, who had raised me by himself. I thought I would probably cry at the wedding, and my dad would probably cry even more since he was already crying now. With that, Larry and I started preparing for our wedding. We were both busy with our jobs, so our days were very hectic. We worked during the weekdays and made wedding preparations over the weekends. There was no time to rest. Our calendars were always full. On the rare day off, we were supposed to visit Larry's parents' house. It was my first time meeting them. Larry had met my father right after he proposed to me. Originally, I planned to visit Larry's parents soon after, but they were busy and our schedules never lined up. Finally, we managed to arrange a visit. As we arrived, I suddenly felt nervous. Don't worry, my parents are very kind, Larry reassured me. His words made me feel a bit better, and I rang the doorbell. It was his mother who opened the door. Mom, I'm home, Larry said. Welcome home, Larry. It's so good of you to come, his mother replied warmly. As she talked with her son, I greeted her politely. Nice to meet you. My name is Linda, and I'm Larry's fiancée. I see, so you're Linda, she said, her tone shifting. She looked me up and down, her smile fading. Then she led us to the living room, where her cold attitude remained. Linda, I'm curious about what you bring to the table. Larry is our treasure and our only child. If you're going to marry him, you need to be a suitable wife. Are you worthy of him? She asked, sounding more like an interrogation. I was taken aback by her question. I hadn't expected such a cold attitude from my future mother-in-law and was at a loss for words. You're going to join our family, you know. Are you ready for that? She continued. True, marrying Larry meant joining his family, but it's not like Larry's family were the Kennedys or some well-known high society family. It's not like I was marrying into a royal family. Why was I being asked to make such a commitment? Besides, I wasn't even going to live with them. I don't like being pressured with questions like these. As I was thinking about how to respond, his mother seemed impatient with my slow reply and scolded me harshly. When I ask you a question, answer me right away. You're so rude, she snapped. I'm asking if you're ready for this, she continued, raising her voice. Despite feeling overwhelmed, I managed to say, I hope that Larry and I will support each other in our marriage. When I said that, his mother was not convinced. What a naive thing to say. You aren't just going to support each other. You were supposed to support Larry. It's your job as a wife to support your husband. You don't even understand the basics, she criticized. Then Larry's father, who was sitting next to her, intervened. Honey, calm down. Sorry about that, Linda. You must have been startled by my wife's words, he said, trying to ease the tension. It's all right, I replied, trying to remain calm. His mother is very protective of her only son. Maybe she was just nervous and spoke without thinking. Just then, Larry's brother walked in. He spoke in a quiet, calm, and gentle tone. He seemed like a kind man, which gave me a moment of relief. But that relief was short-lived. With a smile on his face, he said the most unexpected thing. What my wife says is actually justified. What concerns me the most is that you come from a single-parent family. What do you mean by that? I asked, confused. Well, being raised by just one parent doesn't have a good public image. We can't be too happy to have such a person become the wife of our only son, can we? He explained. Hold on a minute, I said, unable to let this comment slide. What is wrong with being raised by a single parent? My father worked very hard to raise me by himself. I am very thankful for my upbringing, and I am proud of my father. Being raised by a single parent doesn't make me any less valuable. But they still argued. Since you were missing one parent, you couldn't have learned how to be a good wife, do housework, and such. I responded, I did a lot of housework to help my father. I can also cook pretty well, so please don't say that. Despite my response, Larry's words ignored what I said, and he finally stated, I will allow you to marry Larry, but in exchange, you must promise to devote everything to us because we are Larry's parents. Can you promise me that? What? I was shocked. Wow, since you came here to ask for our permission to marry our son, you do know what your duties are, don't you? Before I could say more, he continued the conversation. I found that my in-laws had completely taken over the conversation, giving me little chance to respond. That night, as I thought more about the marriage, I decided to share my feelings with Larry. Say, Larry, do your parents always talk to people like that? What about it? Larry seemed unfazed. I was surprised that Larry didn't see anything wrong with what his parents had said to me. Well, I mean the way your parents spoke to me and what they said. Oh, really? Well, they were just talking about whether you were ready for this marriage. I get that your parents are worried about their son's marriage, but I feel like what they were saying was a bit too much. I said. Really? Why is that? My parents didn't say anything wrong. Besides, they've given us permission to get married, so don't worry about it. Larry replied. That's true, but I felt uneasy, I said. Larry seemed to side with his parents more than with me, and that was very troubling. I guess he realized I was feeling unsure because he gave me a hug. Linda, you don't have to worry so much. My parents are just a bit upset because their only son is getting married, he said. He spoke as if he didn't fully support me. It's all going to be fine. Don't overthink it. I'm sure they just want what's best for us. They want us to be as good of a couple as they are. That's why they were a bit harsh. Oh, really? I replied. Like he said, maybe his parents have high expectations for us. But even if that's the case, I don't think it's right for them to belittle me because I was raised by my father. I don't think people who say such things make a good couple. We are the ones getting married, and we should be the focus, not their approval or disapproval. With that perspective, although I was still a bit upset, I decided not to dwell too much on his parents' opinions. Then the day of the wedding arrived. We had many guests, including our relatives, friends, colleagues, and bosses. I walked down the aisle with my father, who had raised me all my life. Larry and I exchanged our vows and rings. We snatched my hand away from him and yelled at me like a professional wrestler in the middle of a challenge. Listen to me, Linda. After this wedding, you are going to devote yourself to us completely. Prepare yourself because we are going to test you really hard, she said. The guests started whispering to each other, and some even thought it was a joke and laughed. Then Larry's father grabbed the microphone. Linda, don't you feel embarrassed to wear a dress like that? It doesn't suit you at all, dear. You should tell her the truth, his mother chimed in. As expected, the whispers among the guests changed in tone. I looked at Larry, hoping he would stop his father's rude comments, but Larry said he couldn't do that and that his parents weren't doing anything wrong. It became clear he would never protect me from his parents in the future. That was the moment I realized it. I was certain of it, even as the hall buzzed around us. My in-laws were drunk and continued to insult me. Well, you're already married, but if you're going to be part of this family, you need to prove that you have enough money, they said. Yes, that's right, they continued. After you register your marriage at the city hall, you should give us a few thousand a month and your entire bonus. I was shocked by their words. I never thought they would say such things at our wedding reception. I just stared at them, feeling my face go pale. My father took the microphone from them. Enough of this. Don't you realize you're making fools of yourselves? He said. Though still showing some respect, his parents glared at my father. Why are you interrupting us while we're talking? I knew this woman's father was no good. Single parents are never any good, they said. Why do they talk like this? How dare they insult my father, I thought. My father, keeping his cool, replied, You people are even worse than I imagined. You even refuse to meet me because I am a single father. I never thought that someone like you would work for President Scott. President Scott is such a respectable person. I assumed his employees would be decent as well, my father continued. At that, my father-in-law's face turned very serious. How do you know President Scott? He's a business partner of my company and, more importantly, an old friend of mine, my father explained. And speaking of single parents, President Scott was raised by his mother alone. So you just insulted the president of the company you work for. Seeing my in-laws' faces fall at my father's words, I realized they finally understood the mess they had gotten themselves into. I apologize, sir. Please don't tell the president about this, my in-law pleaded, suddenly falling to his knees. Just moments before, he had acted like he was in charge, but now he looked defeated. I could hear laughter from the guests. Some even pulled out their cell phones to record the scene. No matter how much you apologize, you can't take back your words, my dad said. He walked over to me and asked if I wanted to go home with him. I said yes and took the microphone from Larry's hand. Thank you for the great entertainment, but there will be no marriage, I announced to Larry, his parents, and everyone who attended. I will make sure to return the money you gave us for this occasion. Then I left the reception hall with my dad. I caught a glimpse of Larry and his parents looking dismayed, and soon after, his relatives rushed over with worried expressions on their faces. The place must have been in complete chaos. As I returned their money, I apologized to the guests. They all expressed sympathy for me and praised me and my dad for our actions, saying it was good that we weren't taken advantage of by such terrible people. Later, Larry's co-workers who had attended the reception must have spread the word about what happened at his company. Larry became known for having such unreasonable parents and was criticized for having a weak character. His embarrassment was so great that he resigned voluntarily. Of course, the president of my father-in-law's company found out about the incident. Larry's father was demoted and sent to an insignificant division of the company, transferred to a remote office in the countryside. I heard that Larry's family has been ostracized by all his relatives because of what happened at the wedding. While it's unfortunate, it really was their own doing, and sometimes things like that just can't be avoided. In the meantime, I've been using this opportunity to strengthen my relationship with my dad. We've been spending more quality time together, and it's helped me appreciate all he's done for me even more. One day, he sat me down for a serious talk. Linda, are you interested in running the business? He asked, looking at me with a mixture of hope and seriousness. Do you mean, I started, a bit unsure where he was heading with this. Why don't you work towards becoming the president of my company? He suggested. It was a big step, and he seemed to believe I was ready to take it on. I'll do my best, I promised him, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. I decided then to focus on stepping up my game at work rather than getting entangled in romantic relationships for now. I want to prove to myself and to my dad that I could excel and perhaps one day be a great leader like him. Currently, I am deeply involved in learning everything I can at my dad's company. The work is challenging but fulfilling, and I'm determined to make the most of this opportunity. Reflecting on the wedding fiasco, it's clear that Larry's in-laws were quite unreasonable, turning what should have been a beautiful event into a spectacle. Thankfully, since the marriage wasn't officially registered, Linda, myself in this scenario, was spared from a legally binding mistake. Now, free from any marital ties and with no looming in-law issues, I can focus solely on my career aspirations. It's a relief to know that out of a chaotic situation came a clear path forward for me. I look forward to what the future holds and am excited about the potential of leading the company. I wish myself all the best and hope that anyone watching this story can take something valuable from it. Thank you for staying till the end. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed this story, and I hope to see you in the next video.
A man showed up at our door, saying my daughter ran off without paying $3,000 at his fancy steakhouse, said Bill. He claimed to be the head chef, but I couldn't believe it. I'm Layla, 30 years old, living with my husband Daniel and our daughter Emma. There was no way Emma could do such a thing. I stood firm against their fierce expressions, defending my daughter's innocence. I was tricked by an ex-boyfriend who took $3,000 from me and then disappeared when I found out I was pregnant with his baby. I tried to contact him, but he was gone. I was left alone, divorced and almost broke. But I didn't give up. I had Emma and was ready to face whatever came next. Then the news came that my ex was arrested. The man who told me was Daniel, now my husband. He stood by me through everything, even though I was tired and worn out. Despite our age gap, I was drawn to Daniel's strength and reliability. I worried he wouldn't accept me because I was divorced, but he did. Now we're happily together, with a good relationship with Daniel's parents. One day, I got a call from Daniel's parents. My mother-in-law's voice, full of warmth, asked if we could visit. They wanted to see their granddaughter, whom they adore despite not being related by blood. I happily agreed and promised to let Daniel know. After exchanging pleasantries, my mother-in-law ended the call. It takes about 5 hours to reach their countryside home from the city where we live. When Daniel returned home in the evening, I excitedly told him about the invitation from his parents. "Well, I haven't taken any vacation this month yet," he replied. "Let's take some time off and go see them. I'll ask my boss if we can have a few days off in a row," Daniel suggested eagerly, dialing his boss for permission. Thankfully, his boss agreed, and we began looking forward to reuniting with his parents after a long while. However, on the day of our visit, Daniel suddenly had to work. "You go ahead. I'll join you as soon as I'm done. It might be late, possibly not until tomorrow morning," he explained, kissing us goodbye before heading to the office. I quickly informed my in-laws about the change of plans and then embarked on the journey with my daughter. As soon as we arrived at my in-laws' house, they welcomed us warmly, and we settled in comfortably. They were eagerly awaiting Daniel's arrival. The next morning, my in-laws went about their usual routine, heading to the barn. I offered to help, but they insisted I relax and enjoy my visit, so I stayed behind, waiting for their return. Suddenly, the doorbell rang too early for Daniel's arrival. Assuming it was a neighbor, I hurried to answer it. "I'm coming," I called out, opening the door to find a stern-looking man in his 70s standing there. He glared at me and then demanded, "I own the local steakhouse. Your daughter ate there and left without paying. You owe me $3,000. His words caught me off guard, and I blinked in surprise. He went on to explain that a young girl had visited his restaurant the previous night, despite being warned that it was too expensive for her. She consumed $3,000 worth of food and drinks before leaving without paying. He claimed she was my daughter and insisted that as her parent, I should foot the bill. I shake my head, trying to explain, but he's too angry to listen. "Can I know your name?" I ask. "It's Ethan." "Now pay up," he snaps back. "I need to check with my in-laws if they know you," I respond. "What? Shouldn't you be paying me instead of wasting time?" "Yes, but please give me a moment." I ask him to wait and quickly call my in-laws to confirm something. They respond fast, revealing a surprising fact. Trying to keep my composure, I turn to the man. "I can't pay you," I tell him. "What? You don't care if my business suffers? If you don't pay, I'll call the police," he threatens. "Please, let's try to sort out this misunderstanding," I plead. "There's no misunderstanding. I got her name when she dined," Ethan insists, reaching for his phone to call the police. A policeman happened to pass by, and the steakhouse owner flagged him down to explain the situation. The officer approached me with a stern look and said, "Can we talk?" Confused and intimidated by his gaze, I didn't know what to do. "Your daughter is suspected of dining and dashing. If things remain unresolved, we'll have to take her into custody," he informed me, insisting that I hand over my daughter immediately. "No, there's been a mistake. My daughter wouldn't do such a thing." I protested, but the officer remained firm. Sensing the tension, the steakhouse owner intervened, offering a compromise. "I'm not heartless. If he can pay, I'll forgive her. After all, we're neighbors," he said, looking at me. "Are you sure about this, Ethan?" The officer asked. "Of course. She's just a young girl. It's an honor she wanted to eat at my place," Ethan replied with a laugh. The officer then presented me with an option. "Ethan is giving you a way out. Pay the $3,000 bill and he won't press charges." Despite the pressure, I stood firm in my decision. As I tried to explain, the steakhouse owner's face turned red with anger and he shouted, "You're rejecting my kindness. Is this how you've taught your daughter to behave? Don't play games with me. Please calm down. Why were you refusing to pay? If you don't, your daughter will face serious consequences," the police officer interjected, looking puzzled. "I can't agree to this without considering all the facts," I responded, but the steakhouse owner interrupted with a laugh, saying, My apologies. Are you saying you don't have $3,000 on you right now? No worries. We all forget things as we get older. We do accept credit cards at our establishment. If you trust me with your card, I can process the payment now and return it to you later. How does that sound? With that, he gestured for me to fetch my wallet. I declined to hand over my credit card, expressing concern about the risk, and instead offered to accompany him to settle the payment. However, the steakhouse owner responded with threats, raising his fist and shouting, "Don't you trust me? I'm in the credit business. Be careful what you say, or you'll regret it." When I insisted on accompanying him, he became agitated, yelling, "You're disrespecting me. I have connections with influential organizations. If you can't pay, I have ways to make you pay $3,000. That's why I've involved the police." Shocked by his words, I looked to the police officer for assistance, but he avoided eye contact, feigning ignorance. "Officer, did you hear that? Is this allowed?" I asked, seeking help. The officer avoided the question, stating, "I didn't hear anything. Just pay the money and everything will be resolved." "Layla, just follow instructions," the officer insisted sternly. I was stunned. How could a police officer say that? I felt bewildered as the steakhouse owner continued to intimidate me with his threats. Most people would give in to their demands to avoid trouble, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Aren't the police supposed to protect citizens? Why were they siding with him? Despite my desperate pleas, the officer remained silent, refusing to intervene. Feeling helpless, I turned to the steakhouse owner. "Why won't you listen?" he growled, glaring at me. "It's not that I'm not taking you seriously. I can't believe I'm in this situation," I thought to myself, steadfastly refusing to comply. But neither the officer nor the steakhouse owner seemed willing to listen to reason. As I pondered my next move, a taxi pulled up outside our house, and my husband stepped out, looking puzzled. "What's going on?" "Who are these people?" he asked, bewildered. "Sir, your wife needs to take responsibility." "Let me explain," the officer began, but my husband's expression quickly changed to surprise as he listened. Then, with a mischievous grin, he seemed to understand everything. "Sorry for the confusion. My apologies. By the way, officer, which department do you work for? Can I see your badge?" My husband inquired suddenly, catching everyone off guard. The officer hesitated but eventually produced his badge from his pocket. This looks suspicious," my husband remarked, causing the officer to start sweating nervously. Daniel chuckles and says, "Just kidding." The police officer, visibly relieved, manages a forced smile. Daniel then asks about the officer's department and rank. "Is that necessary right now?" The officer responds nervously. "I'm just curious," Daniel says. "I'm a constable stationed at the police box," the officer answers. "Ah, I see. You must be new around here. Thanks for your service," Daniel replies politely. "Yes, I'm still getting acquainted. Would you mind if I contact your station? Can I use the name on your badge?" Daniel asks, pulling out his phone. Before he can proceed, the officer interrupts. "Before we get into that, can you tell me if you're able to pay for Ethan's bill?" He urges Daniel for an answer regarding the payment issue. The steakhouse owner, Ethan, appeared taken aback by my husband's assertiveness, his earlier aggression dissipating. You're the husband, so take responsibility, Ethan insisted. Yes, but I don't have a job that pays that much, Daniel responded calmly. That doesn't excuse dodging your bills, Ethan retorted. Unperturbed, Daniel shrugged. Anyway, he continued, can you tell me your gun's serial number? Ethan looked confused. Why? He asked. It's a standard verification method, Daniel explained. Knowing the number doesn't pose a risk. It's widely accepted. The police officer, also puzzled, questioned Daniel's request. Is that so? He inquired. Observing their reactions, my suspicions grew stronger. By the way, Daniel interjected, giving them a stern look. Would you like to hear my take on this dine and dash incident? They both seemed puzzled by his unexpected suggestion. In conclusion, you're a phony cop trying to run a scam with that old man, my husband accused, catching them off guard. Do you have any proof? They retorted. Then prove I'm wrong, my husband challenged. Turning to me, he said, Lee, bring her here. I rushed to bring our precious child forward, positioning her in front of us to prevent any harm. Daniel stood protectively between us. My daughter is only 1 year old. She can't even walk, let alone dine and dash, he asserted. The two were stunned, mouths agape. That's impossible. Is that really Aria Taylor? Ethan questioned. Of course. I'm only 30 years old. When else could I have had my first child? I countered. Ethan, visibly shaken, took a step back, exchanging a glance with the police officer who nodded in agreement. It seems there's been a mistake. Sorry for the confusion, they stammered, preparing to leave. Daniel intervened, blocking their escape routes as they attempted to leave. I retreated to the entrance, observing through a gap in the door. Can you step aside, please? The officer demanded. No, we won't let you go. You might be scammers, and we won't allow it, Daniel countered firmly. Don't try to intimidate us. I'm a police officer. If you don't move, I'll arrest you for obstructing an investigation, the officer threatened, attempting to push past Daniel, but he swiftly moved to block him again. I apologize for not introducing myself earlier. I'm Daniel Taylor, Chief Inspector of the New York Investigation Division, Daniel announced, revealing his genuine police badge. Unlike the officers, Daniel's badge gleamed with authenticity. Who's the liar now? I'm the real deal, he declared confidently. Whether you're genuine or not, you've engaged in fraud, correct? It's a disgrace for someone in law enforcement. Do you even understand the role of the investigation division? Daniel pressed. What are you talking about? You're clueless about the investigation division, he continued. The division handles complex crimes like fraud, embezzlement, counterfeiting, election violations, financial crimes, defamation, and high-tech offenses. In simpler terms, it deals with criminals like you, Daniel explained sternly. With that, he swiftly produced handcuffs and began to arrest them. Unable to resist Daniel's professional approach, the two were quickly subdued. Daniel wasted no time in contacting the authorities. I've apprehended fraudsters on the scene. This is beyond my jurisdiction. Please dispatch officers from the appropriate area immediately, he instructed over the phone. As they heard Daniel's call, the scammers' faces drained of color. Please forgive us. We were desperate for money. It's our first offense. Please let us go, they pleaded. Just then, my in-laws arrived with the police. Are you all right? Sorry for the delay. This guy was terrible at explaining things. My in-laws apologized. It's all right. Wait, you're here too. What a relief, I responded as they embraced me and our daughter. I had been on edge throughout the ordeal, but finally, I could relax and exhale a sigh of relief as the two fraudsters were escorted into a police car. Initially, I had suspected only the old man to be involved in the scam. When I phoned my in-laws, I inquired if anyone named Ethan resided nearby. They were unfamiliar with the name, having lived in the area for years and knowing all the residents. Their lack of recognition confirmed that this Ethan was not a local. Moreover, considering my daughter's age of just 1, it was implausible for her to have been involved in any dine and dash scheme. Though I hadn't explicitly requested it, my in-laws grasped the urgency of the situation and promised to summon the police. While awaiting their arrival, I felt a surge of tension, resolved to safeguard my daughter. I had sensed something amiss with the police officer from the moment he appeared. As our conversation progressed, my distrust towards him only deepened. Although I lacked concrete evidence initially, Daniel's interrogation ultimately confirmed my suspicions of his falsity. Thankfully, Daniel's presence had averted a potential disaster this time. However, the thought of what could have transpired in his absence sent shivers down my spine. I'm truly relieved that everything ended safely. With Daniel's assistance and the local authorities' involvement, the case regarding the two fraudsters was swiftly resolved. Upon investigation, it became evident that numerous charges awaited them. Daniel recounted the details to me, wearing a mixture of sadness and anger on his face. Surprisingly, it turned out that these individuals were not affiliated with any organization, and their exploits garnered nationwide attention through the news. Thanks to Daniel and my considerate in-laws, I was able to spend an extra day at their home. The news of Daniel's heroic actions spread rapidly, prompting our neighbors to bring over an array of delicacies, turning our gathering into an impromptu celebration. Even our daughter seemed to revel in the joyous atmosphere, remaining cheerful throughout the evening. That night, as I gazed at my daughter's contented face, I couldn't help but bask in the warmth of our happiness. When I was 16, my parents told me to leave home because they needed space for my sister's new baby. Feeling abandoned, I shared my story online, and when my dad realized that his wealthy parents might cut him out of their will, he pleaded with me to take down the post. I just turned 16 last week, but there was no celebration or party for me. My parents barely acknowledged my birthday before telling me I had to leave our house. It turns out my older sister Amanda, who's always been their favorite, is pregnant. Despite having enough space in our 4-bedroom house, they want me to move to my aunt's place to make room for the baby. My parents have never been very caring towards me, but this felt like a new low. They were dead serious during our talk, so I knew they weren't joking or trying to prank me. After explaining that they needed the extra space and that I was old enough to leave, we sat in silence for a while. They promised to continue supporting me financially until I turned 18 and ensure I had everything I needed, but they couldn't have me living with them anymore. I didn't want to argue, but I asked why they couldn't use the guest room for the nursery. They hesitated before admitting they'd given it to Amanda's boyfriend to stay with them. So in short, my parents had their own room, my sister and her boyfriend had another, and the baby would have its own too. Amanda wasn't home, probably on purpose to avoid seeing me leave and feeling guilty. We weren't close due to our age gap, but she'd never been mean to me either. We were mostly polite to each other. But if she was okay with me leaving so she could make room for her baby and boyfriend, maybe she wasn't the sister I thought she was. It hurt, especially on my birthday, but I didn't argue and agreed to go. It's clear to me now that my parents are beyond help. There's no magic phrase to make my parents care about me, and I've come to terms with that. So when they said they wanted me to move in with my aunt, I quietly went to my room and started packing. They helped, but it felt more like they were hurrying me along. They drove me to my aunt's, chatting happily all the way, oblivious to my silence as I stared out the window. When we arrived, they dropped me off without a hug or kiss, then drove off. My aunt greeted me warmly, genuinely happy to see me. We talked, and eventually, I shared my disappointment with my parents' actions. Her smile vanished, replaced by concern, when I recounted the morning's events. Without a word, my aunt grabbed her phone and excused herself to make a call in the other room. It was unusually quiet for a while until I heard her raising her voice, something she rarely did. I knew someone must have really upset her to provoke such a reaction. When she returned, her face was flushed with anger, a rare sight for her gentle demeanor. She explained that it was my parents who had angered her so much. Apparently, my dad, her brother, had falsely claimed that I had suggested the living arrangement for the baby's sake and that I was perfectly content moving in with my aunt. That's why my aunt was fine with taking me in. She could see I wasn't happy living with my parents, so my suggestion didn't seem out of place to her. Dad tried to persuade her, but she's single and not planning on marriage or kids, so having me around was like having a roommate, and Dad would cover my expenses. She genuinely liked having me and thought I wanted to be there, so she agreed. But now that she knew the truth, she called Dad to confront him. It was messed up, and she wasn't going to let it slide. After the call, she was upset, and so was I. This wasn't something most kids my age dealt with. I always knew they favored my sister, but this was extreme. They had lied to my aunt to cover up their actions, knowing how terrible it was. They gave up the guest room for Amanda's boyfriend, who's in his 20s, has a job and his own place. Amanda could have easily moved in with him, but my parents insisted she stay home to be closer to them, even if it meant sacrificing my comfort. It hurt me deeply, so I decided to go online and reveal what they had done. Unsure if my aunt would support me, I waited until she left the room, then posted everything on my phone without a second thought. I detailed not only that day's events, but also how my parents consistently treated me unfairly, making me feel like a second-class citizen in my own home. It was an emotional moment for me, and the post reflected that. After posting, tears streamed down my face. I turned off my phone, fearing the consequences. An hour later, I attempted to read but couldn't concentrate. When my aunt woke up, she hurried to the living room where I sat since arriving. She calmly asked if I had posted something. I admitted I had. That was the extent of our conversation. I powered on my phone to find that family members had seen the post, and I had received numerous texts from my parents and sister. Meanwhile, relatives commented, expressing support, some reaching out to offer help. Despite the support from relatives, reading my parents' messages filled me with dread. They were seething with anger and hatred, demanding I remove the post. My dad's messages were particularly hurtful, even expressing regret for my existence. My mom's echoed his sentiments. The only slightly different message came from my sister, who simply asked to speak in person. I was overwhelmed by the flood of emotions and messages, unsure how to respond. So, I set my phone aside and withdrew from communication for a few days. Eventually, I decided to block my parents, feeling no desire to engage with them further. I knew my parents were obligated to support me financially until I turned 18, so besides that, I saw no reason to communicate with them. My aunt supported my decision, and if my dad tried to contact her, she didn't mention it to me. We acted as if nothing had happened, indicating her support for me. That was all I needed. For the past week, I had little to no contact with my parents. However, today they unexpectedly appeared outside my school, visibly upset. Fortunately, my friends, who were aware of the situation, surrounded me as a protective barrier, allowing me to avoid interaction with my parents if I chose not to. Despite my reluctance, they continued calling my name, forcing me to acknowledge them. I approached them and made it clear that I wanted nothing to do with them. However, they ignored my plea and insisted that I accompany them home immediately. Their sudden change of heart baffled me, considering how little I mattered to them before. It seemed like they were only concerned about their reputation among family members. Refusing to go anywhere until I understood their motives, I demanded an explanation for their behavior. They appeared angry yet insistent on my return. Concerned about my friends overhearing, I requested privacy to speak with them. Once my friends were out of earshot, my parents revealed a reason for their sudden appearance. They explained that they needed me to come back because I had been ignoring their calls and texts, and it was crucial for them to have me return to secure their inheritance. After my online post, word spread throughout the family, reaching my grandparents. Knowing that my paternal grandparents were quite wealthy, they threatened my dad, stating that if they didn't improve their treatment of me and reconcile, my dad would forfeit his inheritance. They were informed that if they failed to mend our relationship and ensure my well-being, my aunt, who was caring for me, would inherit instead. Losing the inheritance was not an option for my dad, as it represented a significant amount of money. Although my parents had a decent income, I understood their desire to secure their inheritance. However, their approach left much to be desired. It was clear they were acting in their own self-interest, not mine. Their lack of empathy was glaring. and I refused to play along. I didn't care about their inheritance and walked away, ignoring their pleas. Taking the bus back to my aunt's, I recounted the ordeal to her, and she shared my frustration. To prevent a repeat, she enlisted the help of her lawyer to explore options for my custody. Despite my parents' legal rights, I knew changes were necessary for me to live with my aunt. I also reached out to my grandparents to thank them for intervening, but made it clear I had no desire to return home after experiencing life with my aunt. I finally felt liberated. Living with my parents had been stifling, and I held on to hope for change that never came. Since my grandparents lived in another city, our meetings were infrequent. However, during holiday gatherings, my parents put on a facade to conceal the truth of my treatment at home. It wasn't outright cruelty, but rather neglect and avoidance. While everything appeared fine on the surface, spending a few days at my parents' house would reveal that they mostly ignored me, focusing solely on my sister. With her pregnancy, the situation worsened, and I was completely sidelined. I confided in my grandparents about everything, and they assured me that if living with my aunt was what I wanted, they would ensure it happened. They promised to cover all my needs if my parents relinquished their rights. This conversation brought me immense relief, but it was short-lived. Just a few hours later, I received an email from my dad. It wasn't hostile, but it was disheartening. He expressed disappointment in my decision to share our family issues online, arguing that my grandparents would have learned about it eventually. Now, not only were my grandparents upset with them, but they were also facing backlash from other relatives, feeling ostracized, which they deemed unfair. He mentioned that even some of his colleagues had come across the post because it was public and had appeared on their feeds due to his tagging. This had created an uncomfortable situation for him at work, and he believed that my actions had unnecessarily stirred up drama in their lives. In hindsight, I regretted sharing the story about my parents asking me to leave on my 16th birthday to make room for my pregnant sister's baby. Update 1. Firstly, I want to express my gratitude to everyone who took the time to comment on my post. Your supportive words mean a lot to me, so thank you. Now, addressing some of the questions many of you have asked regarding why I hadn't left my parents' house earlier and why I waited for them to ask me to leave, especially when my grandparents and aunt were willing to assist. The reason I didn't seek help earlier is that, as I mentioned in the original post, I wasn't subjected to outright cruelty. While I wasn't treated poorly, I felt ignored and unwelcome, which in its own way is a form of mistreatment. However, I convinced myself that as long as I had shelter and food, I was fine, even if I didn't feel loved. The neglect had become so normalized for me that I didn't realize its impact. As for why I didn't turn to my family for assistance, I didn't want to burden them. I feared the consequences if they refused to help and my parents found out. My parents placed great importance on appearances, so I kept my struggles to myself, suffering in silence. Additionally, my aunt didn't offer to take me in earlier out of respect for my parents, and she wasn't sure if I would want to live with her. However, the current situation unfolded naturally, and in hindsight, it's turned out for the best, albeit a bit late. My aunt is currently consulting with a lawyer to pursue transferring my custody rights to her, which will likely be challenging given the stakes involved with the inheritance. However, I have confidence that my grandparents and aunt will support me, even if it leads to legal proceedings. My aunt has been genuinely remorseful since my arrival, acknowledging the neglect I faced at home and regretting not intervening sooner. At least now, there's clarity within my family, and I'm feeling optimistic about the future. Regarding my sister, she reached out to me, expressing a desire to meet in person. Unsure how to respond, I chose to ignore her message. While she hasn't been overly unkind to me personally, she has adopted the same distant behavior as my parents. I had assumed that the decision to kick me out for her boyfriend and child was her idea, leading me to believe that our relationship might sour further as a result. I didn't respond to her initial message. Despite our strained relationship, I still felt closer to her than my parents because she treated me kindly whenever we interacted. It wasn't her fault that my parents favored her over me. So when she reached out again 3 days ago, Asking me to visit, I decided to call her and inquire about her intentions. I assumed she wanted me to come back home, but to my surprise, she explained that she was currently living with her boyfriend and wasn't feeling well enough to go out. Instead, she wanted us to discuss the family situation. Intrigued, I agreed to meet her. Upon arriving, she began by apologizing for never standing up for me, despite knowing our parents' biased treatment. While they overlooked my achievements to celebrate hers, I always felt like the least wanted child. However, she admitted to never feeling comfortable confronting our parents about this issue, especially since I appeared to tolerate it. Her reluctance to speak up contributed to the status quo. Now realizing how unfair this was, she apologized and expressed a desire for change. She also revealed that the living arrangement was a surprise to her, as our parents hadn't discussed it with her. She was shocked to learn that they had asked me to leave to make room for the new baby and her boyfriend because she had no prior knowledge of this plan. In fact, she hadn't requested any such arrangement. Her original intention was to stay with our parents until the baby was a few months old, at which point she planned to move in with her boyfriend. She had considered leaving earlier but stayed at our parents' insistence. However, after reading my post, she realized that the situation couldn't continue and decided to move out within a week. This decision led to a major confrontation with our parents, who disagreed with her choice to leave. They accused her of being ungrateful and selfish, despite the fact that she had never made any promises to them. They had simply assumed things on their own. As a result of this disagreement, they stopped speaking to each other. In the end, all the drama amounted to nothing, as my parents ended up losing both of their children. At least she had the decency to apologize for her shortcomings as a sister and as a person in general, which I accepted because harboring resentment wouldn't benefit me in any way. We had a heart-to-heart conversation, and she assured me, much like my aunt did, that she would be there for me unconditionally from now on. It was a comforting reassurance. It's been almost a week since I made my original post, and I still haven't heard from my parents since the email. I assume they've abandoned their attempts to reconcile with me. I suspect my grandparents played a role in this, as they called me to inform me that my parents would no longer bother me and that I need not worry about them showing up at my school or contacting me again. I hadn't mentioned my dad's email to them, so I assumed there was a discussion between my parents and grandparents. Although I'm unsure about the details of their conversation, I believe my parents have given up by now. Update 2. It's only been 3 days since my last update, and today my aunt delivered some surprising news. My parents have agreed to relinquish their parental rights. The legal formalities are underway, and soon my aunt will become my legal guardian. It's a mix of emotions for me. On one hand, I'm relieved that I'll finally have a home where I feel valued and wanted, but on the other hand, there's a sense of emptiness and sadness. It's strange to finally see this happening, but I know it's for the best. This is what I've been hoping for. Update 3. Hey everyone. It's been a couple of weeks since my aunt took over as my legal guardian. It's official now, and I couldn't be happier. Interestingly, I learned that my parents agreed to give up custody because my grandparents gave them an ultimatum: either lose their entire inheritance or keep 50% and forfeit custody of me, with the condition that they never contact me again. I'm not surprised by their choice, and honestly, I'm not even upset. It feels like I've escaped a troubling situation. Good riddance, I say. I'm still in contact with my sister, although my parents are attempting to reconcile with her before her due date. However, she's requested some time alone, urging them to respect her space and cease their daily attempts to reach out. Honestly, I can't help but chuckle at the chaotic situation they created within their own family. But you know what? I'm content with my aunt, and that's all that truly matters to me.